Hello, I'm Professor McCoy, and Jesus Christ is King. Now, it seems like every year lately, that phrase becomes controversial for some reason. Now, I don't really want to get into the specific politics or anything, or any of the figures involved. I don't. I'm not. I'm less interested in that aspect of it, in the very contemporary politics of the matter. It's certainly outside my particular academic expertise. My expertise is more in philosophical theology, with respect to the kingship of Christ and its conflict with the secular world. Now, the reasons that are often given for why Christ is king is taken to be a controversial phrase, and why that one in particular is because it's either seen as anti-Semitic, or perhaps it has to do with its perceived opposition to democracy, or who knows? Or perhaps even just because proclaiming the kingship of Christ is antithetical to modern popular atheism. That's certainly the case, and there are certainly modern popular atheists who are upset about it. However, I think that it goes deeper than this. I want to bring this in conversation with John Locke in particular. So John Locke is one of the founders of modern liberalism, and I mean liberalism here in what is typically a relatively positive sense. That is the modern world. The political emphasis on freedom of life, the pursuit of life, liberty, and property, and all of these things, right? So, but I want to look specifically at John Locke's letter concerning toleration, in which he discusses religious toleration and the secular state's stance towards religious diversity within its borders, right, within its society. And generally, Locke is in favor. Locke argues very strongly in favor of toleration of almost any religious tradition that one finds within a given society. I say almost here. He has some very specific um, exceptions to his policy of toleration, and those specific exceptions are named specifically. But then also he sets out some ground rules for the kind of religious tradition that he thinks ought to be tolerated by a secular state and what kinds should not be. So, I want to outline this a little bit. That for Locke, who was an atheist, of course, but still valued religion for its practical place within a stable society, he saw the role of religion as a socially stabilizing force, as something that is socially uniting, and as a kind of moral aid, a moral teacher. What a lot of the enlightened, early to mid Enlightenment thinkers thought of it as well. So Locke envisions a secular society as working in a layered manner, having at the top and most the broadest and most uniting factor being the state, being the secular state. Now, the secular state has no particular religious creed. It is not in any way sectarian. It is seen as a neutral arbiter between various sectarian religious groups. And what makes it unique and what makes it socially important, is the fact that it encompasses all of these groups and stands over all of them in terms of social authority, in terms of power, in terms of what binds a society together. Now, I say binds here, both because it's Lockean language, but then also because this is much older language, and it's a way of talking about religion. Right? Again, the Latin root for religio, for religion, is to bind back together. So religion in the classical sort of Roman context was that which binds together a given society. Now, for Locke, that's the state. And what we call religions are okay and should be tolerated and perhaps even encouraged insofar as they are subservient to that overarching liberal state. And this leads us to his exceptions and why he has those exceptions. Most notably, he points to two major exceptions, but we can point to other ones that he would also object to as well. His two major exceptions that he points to are Catholicism and Islam, or Mohammedanism, I believe he called it. Now, we can point to others for the same reasons, but the main reason that he objects to these two um, is because he sees them as giving their adherents a higher loyalty than the secular state. Because Catholicism has the Pope and has its own ecclesiastical structure of authority with the bishops and even all the way down to parish priests. That stands in potential opposition to the authority structures of the secular state. Islam works similarly. Muslims are expected to hold the dictates of the Quran above any given secular laws or secular organizations that they find themselves within. We can point to other groups as well that would fit these criteria. We can point to groups like the Amish. We can point to groups like Jehovah's Witnesses. We might, perhaps controversially and perhaps steering into the charge of anti-Semitism, unfortunately, but we could point to the common accusation of Jewish dual loyalty. But things like this, right, are the kinds of things that a Lockean secularist would object to in terms of religious toleration. They would not tolerate any religious commitment that places itself as above the demands of the secular state. Now, what does this have to do with why Christ is king is suddenly controversial? Well, hopefully these pieces start to fit together in our minds. When we declare that Christ is king, what does that mean? Ultimately, what we mean by this, what we ought to mean by this, at the most basic level, at the most pious and religious level, is that Christ and our obligation to Christ is above everything else in our lives. That Christ is ultimately our king, and that no one else is. There is, to borrow the Christian anarchist slogan, there's no king but Christ. By proclaiming that Christ is king, what we are essentially saying is that our loyalty to Christ is above and beyond any other, in particular, any loyalty to the secular state. Now, any good Christian, I think, should be able to affirm that. However, a lot of particularly Americanist Christians can't. A lot of, I should say, good secular Christians following along these lines laid out by John Locke can't proclaim that Christ is king, and might therefore object to it, might want to come up with reasons for objecting to it. Now, what should we do? How do we move forward with this? I think that we need to not just keep proclaiming that Christ is king, because he is, absolutely. Again, over and above everything in the world, anything we could anything we could even possibly have any other loyalty to, our obligations and our loyalty needs to be to Christ. And beyond that, I think we need to carefully remember what that means, both to us as those who proclaim it, and to those who object to it. To the secularists who object to the kingship of Christ, it's not simply that they're rejecting to kingship. It's not simply that they're rejecting to Christ. It's that they're rejecting the combination of the two. They're rejecting the fact that we, Catholics especially, but many Christians as well, many other Christians as well, have a higher loyalty than that we have to any aspect of the secular state or to any other aspect of society that they would like us to place as our ultimate guiding principle in life. In other words, they would like for us to commit some form of idolatry. But the proclamation that Christ is king should be a reminder that we cannot ever do that. We ultimately have one loyalty, and that is to Christ, and that everything else is below that and subservient to it. So, that's all I have to say on this topic. A relatively short video, but always remember, Christ is king. I'll see you next time.